yours is Mr. Charles once again. This time around, we are doing the national paper, November 2020. Okay, so obviously you need to download the past paper to follow. Please take out a notebook or a notepad to make notes as well. I'm doing live for 5, the contextual questions. Okay, so let's do this. Remember, question 9. Okay, here we go. Okay, so remember, the first thing we do, you identify the chapter. There we go. So chapter 1. Wow. Imagine you reading Life of Pi, chapter 1 to 100, and you are stressing about the chapters, and they give you chapter 1. The pain, you are grateful, and you like, the pain, all the effort, all the time, and they give you chapter 1. Yeah. So obviously you are going to read chapter 1. You're going to read what's in front of you. Let's go to the questions. Okay. Oh, I do have the Life of Pi analysis per chapter as well on YouTube. Okay. So 9.1 for 3 marks. Account for pies having nothing to go home to in Pondicherry. So you need to explain why Pi says I have nothing to go home to in Pondicherry. Okay. So number one, you can say that obviously the zoo no longer exists. Okay. The zoo has been sold. Pi's family has obviously perished, passed away at sea. Um, Pi also started a new family. He's married to Mina Patel. He has 2 children. He's living in Canada. He studied as well zoology and religious studies. So there's nothing to go home to in Pondicherry. The reason why Pi's father moved to Canada or attempted to move to Canada is because of the political uncertainty in India. Pi's father accused Mrs. Gandhi as being a corrupt politician, and he accused Mrs. Gandhi of being a dinosaur and not being secular, and that is one of the reasons why they decided to move, because Mrs. Gandhi, was unable to modernize India at the time. So that's one mark. The second mark would be the zoo has been sold. There's nothing there for them. Then you can go on. The third mark, Pi's family has perished at sea. They passed on. And then you can even go further and explain that Pi is now he has his own family. He's married and has 2 children, a girl and a boy as well. 3 marks, very easy. 9.2, refer to line 1, I love Canada. Using this extract as a starting point, discuss the change in Pi's attitude towards Canada. Grade 12s, here you need to have what we call a shift. There must be a shift in meaning. So you need to say, at first, Pi was A, B, C, D, E. However, Pi went on to say whatever. You understand? You must have a shift in meaning. This is similar to a paradoxical question. It is similar to those contrasting questions. It is similar to those irony questions. There must be a shift in meaning. And ideally, you are going to use the word however to indicate that shift in meaning. So you can say, discuss that change in Pi's attitude towards Canada. At first, Pi was against or opposed the idea to move to Canada. That's 1 mark if you say that. Pi was against the idea, or Pi did not want to go, or Pi was reluctant, or Pi was hesitant, or Pi was opposed. That will give you 1 mark. However, Pi starts to love Canada. Okay? He's fond of Canada. He liked Canada. He enjoys Canada. Even if you write it like that, that will give you a second mark. And the third mark will be for that critical comment. We're looking for that critical comment. So you can say that Pi in Canada, he was able to study zoology and religious studies. He found his place of happiness. Okay, so you have the first part, the second part, and you have a comment as well. Pai was able to study zoology and religious studies at the University of Toronto, and he found his place of happiness, his new home. He also started a life for himself. He's married with two children as well. Okay, 9.3. Refer to line 7 to 8. They are nightmares tinged with love. Comment on the contradictory nature of Pai's nightmares in the context of the novel. So when I see the word contradictory, I know that my answer must consist of two parts. It is exactly what I explained earlier on. My answer must say on the one hand, however, on the other hand. Or at first, however, and then you provide the paradoxical, facet to the answer. So when it's contradictory, you are looking for that shift in meaning as well. So you can say, but now you need to explain how the nature of Pi's nightmares are contradictory. So you can say, number one, that Pi had nightmares about Richard Parker, given his brutal, demeanor. So Richard Parker reminded Pi constantly of his brutal demeanor. So he had nightmares because of this. However, he was also fond of Richard Parker, given that Richard Parker, formed a companionship with him. They formed a sense of brotherhood influenced by religion. So we have this reminder of his brutal nature. Then we have, however, Richard Parker also provided Pi with a sense of companionship and brotherhood. Okay, and therefore he was fond of RP. Now you need to go further and comment that RP, provided Pi with a coping mechanism from his savage self. So RP is a coping mechanism. It is an alter ego, a second personality in this context. Pi is able to deal with trauma and to deal with his savage self by, you know, um, projecting all the brutal acts onto RP. It's a method of coping with trauma and savageness. It's a coping mechanism. Okay, 9.4. Refer to line 13. Fresh off the boat are you? And line 16 to 17. Hey, he had no idea how deeply those words wounded me. Based on your knowledge of Pi's nature and actions in the novel, discuss why the waiter's words affected Pi so deeply. Firstly, Pi did not understand the waiter. The waiter is like fresh off the boat. In other words, the waiter is asking, "Are you new?" Because remember, and I know it's a stereotype, but in Canada, in India, sorry, it is a tradition to eat with your hands. Okay, so Pa's obviously eating with his hands. Okay, so when he went to Canada, he ate with his hands. Obviously, it's part of his culture. The waiter asked, "Fresh off the boat are you?" Implying, "Are you new?" Because here we don't eat with our hands, we eat with a knife and a fork. Okay, we eat with a knife and a fork. Pi misunderstood this. Fresh off the boat. And these, it reminded him of his trauma. It reminded him of his ordeal. It reminded Pi of his traumatic experience because he is indeed fresh off the boat. Okay? In other words, fresh from his ordeal, his experience with Richard Parker for 227 days. So you have to explain that misunderstanding. Then you can explain that Pa is still traumatized. He's still traumatized. That is why he was unable to eat thereafter, subsequently. Pa is not able to adapt to Canada. He's still adapting. Fresh off the boat, he is still adapting. And the statement fresh off the boat, it reminded Pi of his ordeal. So for 3 marks, you explain the misunderstanding. You explain that Pi is still traumatized. Some of you will even go on to explain the idea of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's perfectly fine. And then you explain that these words, it reminded Pi, it provided him with a flashback of trauma that he experienced during his ordeal. For 3 marks, very easy. Remember to like, subscribe, and do comment. And yeah, I'll see you on the other side. Cheers.